The term populism has been a frequent, albeit often misunderstood, term used to define the political strategies used by prominent government figures throughout Southern America, and Argentina in particular. Recent memory shows several populist leaders as Argentine heads of state. Prominent case studies include Juan Perón, Carlos Menem, Nestor and Cristina Kirchner, and debatedly even Javier Milei. These leaders, however, despite all utilizing populist narratives, tout extraordinarily different economic policies. Today, I set out to answer the question, how does populism relate to economic policy? In Argentina, the primary figure of populism is Juan Perón, who assumed the power as the head of state 3 times, once in 1946, again in 1951, and finally in 1973. Between his first and second term, he was in power for 9 years. His rule was interrupted by an anti-populist coup that banned the Peronist party within elections. The years that followed were marked by political and economic instability until Peronist parties were permitted to run for office once again. Perón thus came back into power again in 1973, after which he died in 1974, passing the presidency to his wife Isabel Perón. As I discuss Perón, as well as Menem and Milei, you will see that the relationship between populism and economic policy often boils down to the question of development. These leaders ask, if Argentina was once one of the wealthiest countries, how come its people now face impoverishment? Throughout his time in office, Juan Perón combated an economic principle that kept Argentina impoverished that is today known as la teoría de dependencia, or the theory of dependence. Explaining the theory of dependence, Eduardo Galeano, in his work Open Veins of History, discusses how the impoverishment of South America can be attributed to its exploitation by other international actors. According to Galeano, underdevelopment in Latin America is a consequence of development elsewhere, and Latin Americans are poor because the ground we tread is rich, and that places privileged by nature have been cursed by history. Explaining further, Galeano offers a wealth of examples that demonstrate how the United States and Europe have built some of their most profitable industries by using cheap raw materials and labor from South America. Juan Perón was aware that the exploitation of Southern America via exploitative importation practices would impoverish Argentina, and therefore his economic policies consisted largely of import substitution, a practice wherein imports are minimized for domestically made products. As Galeano explains, however, Argentina experienced a return of economic impoverishment following the military coup d'etat that overthrew Isabel Perón in 1976. During this military dictatorship, the period of import substitution was put to a dramatic end, and Argentina lost its self-sufficiency in favor of economic dependence on the United States. Explaining this economic downturn, Gabriel Kessler and Maria Mercedes de Virgilio discuss the impoverishment of the middle class, in particular in their article Impoverishment of the Middle Class in Argentina, the New Poor in Latin America. In their article, Kessler and de Virgilio explain how the lives of the Argentine people changed dramatically under the military dictatorship. During this time period, amidst the bloody violence used by the military to suppress dissidents, much of the middle class that grew dramatically in size during the Perón administrations was dropped into poverty. Inflation was rampant and many people lost their jobs. According to the authors, between 1980 and 1990, workers lost 38.8% of their income value. After too many lives lost, the military dictatorship eventually ended, leaving room for the second populist wave in Argentina. The second populist wave in Argentina brought with it Carlos Menem. Menem was a staunch advocate for national unity and peace. Scholar Jeffrey Shumway wrote that Menem wanted to heal the wounds of his country, reconcile civilians and the military, and unify the nation. After the military dictatorship, the people wanted peace. So, Menem, in true populist fashion, allied himself with the people and advocated for this peace. Economically, This meant that Menem wanted stability. The Argentine peso, which has seen rapid fluctuations in value within the past few years, was thus set to be tethered in value to a currency thought to be much more stable, the US dollar. Domingo Caballo, Minister of the Economy under Menem, thus established the convertibility plan, which set each Argentine peso equivalent to a US dollar. Evidently, Menem did not adopt the same economic strategy of his populist predecessor, Perón. If anything, he made the Argentine economy more dependent on the US economy than ever. Menem continued this pattern of dependence in his approach to the international market. To keep the value of the Argentine peso equivalent to the US dollar, he took out millions in loans, just like the military dictatorship, from the International Monetary Fund. In exchange for low interest rates, the IMF required that Argentina incorporate what was called the Washington Consensus. This consensus required the adoption of neoliberal policies into Argentina's laws, translating to the end of many government-funded public institutions in an ever-increasing reliance on global trade. So, whereas Perón sought to roll back international reliance, Menem used it as a means of pursuing the peace he promised. 2001 came around and, as Galeano likely would have predicted, over-reliance on the United States failed. The convertibility plan, the economy, and everyone's savings kicked the bucket. Violence ensued and no one wanted to be responsible for restoring order. Over the course of just 12 days in 2001, there were 5 Argentine presidents. In 2003, Argentina had its first democratically elected president following the crisis, Nestor Kirchner. Both Nestor and his wife, Cristina Kirchner, constitute what is known as the third populist wave in Argentina. Notably, during their presidencies, they helped expand access to civil rights across minority groups. With regards to the economy, however, they were virtually indistinguishable from Menem. They too relied on international trade to support the Argentine economy. However, it was a different economic world while the Kirchners were in power. With the commodity boom and the boom of trade between China and Argentina, particularly with regards to soybeans, the economy under the Kirchners relatively stabilized once again. The Kirchner economic legacy is tainted with corruption. Advocating for social reform, they hearkened back to the Peronist promises of the past to push towards a more equitable distribution across society. However, their neoliberal reliance in reality served to benefit those who were already wealthy, and in particular, themselves. Several scandals later and a disgraced party, Argentina elected a political outsider from a brand new political party, Javier Milei, of the Libertarian Party. Javier Milei, to put it lightly, is a very polemic figure within Argentina. Nonetheless, he gained his power by employing similar populist strategies as did Perón, Menem, and the Kirchners. He identified himself with the people, who he understood as being fed up with the coalition of the elites who themselves were all corrupt. So, consistent with these beliefs, Milei has set out to destroy almost all public institutions, taking the privatizations of the already neoliberal economy and dialing it to 11. Describing himself as an anarcho-capitalist, he believes that economic freedom, limited government, and unlimited respect for private property are the keys to economic growth. Unlike Menem and the Kirchners, Milei is not beholden to a Peronist legacy, and can therefore fully embrace the neoliberal economic trajectory that Menem and the Kirchners partially set into motion. So, having traced Argentine economic history using the work of thinkers such as Galeano, Kessler and Virgilio, and Jeffrey Shumway, we see that the populist leaders of Argentina, despite all utilizing similar rhetoric, did not hold any one specific economic approach between them. Old Peronism was marked by a concerted attempt at import substitution, whereas New Peronism embraces the same neoliberal policies that were pursued by the military dictatorship towards the end of their awful reign. After the Peronist Party estranged itself from the people through the exposure of broad-sweeping corruption, a new political figure emerged to take their populist place. However, he too embraced neoliberalism, daring to take it to the extreme in a political environment where the Argentine people just wanted to try something new. Therefore, if populism is predicated on allying oneself with an identified group of the people, it makes sense that there would be no steadfast economic policy. What the people want changes, and if one approach fails, they will want to try another. With the corruption and half-hearted promises of Menem and the Kirchners, the model of economic redistribution faded out of the public consciousness, being replaced by a wholehearted embrace of neoliberalism. Should this fail, a new, or an old, economic model will arise. Only time will tell. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Bye!